how do we think the Long Island serial killer could be caught? All right. Usually, in my opinion, we can look to the past. How have other elusive serial killers been caught in the past? I think that would be our best guess. Now, obviously, there's always the X factor, stuff that you can't foresee that may get the person caught. The unknown. Who is he? How does he disarm these women? How is it that he hasn't been caught? All right, so what we want to look at in this video is different ways similar killers operated and see how they were caught, to see what we can glean by looking at others with similar makeups. First, we have to agree on the parameter of who is LISK so that we can say what we should compare. I'm going to use Practical Homicide Investigations, which was written by NYPD veteran homicide detective Shannan Gilbert. Probably butchered that, sue me. As a resource, I'll link the book in the description. It's a great resource. I was introduced to it when I went to John Jay Criminal Justice College. But getting right into it, the below characteristics are taken verbatim from the textbook. All right, so first, we're going to compare killers should be sex-related serial homicides. LISK would be characterized as an organized killer. Typical traits: above average intelligence, methodical cunning, likely owns a car in good working order condition. He's mobile. He travels more than the average person. Fantasy and rituals are important. So we see this play out with the right type of person. The victims will share common traits. They'll take souvenirs or trophies to relive the killing. Their psychopathy would be such that they're excited by the cruelty of the act, and they take pleasure in torturing the victim. And then finally, he's aware of police procedures, and the bodies are often transported to a location which is well hidden, typically a place that they'd be very familiar with. With this out of the way, the first comparable I'd like to look at is Gary Ridgeway. He's also known as the Green River Killer. So much has been written and many videos have been created about Ridgeway. Obviously, if you want a deeper dive, go look at those. But this is going to be more of, directed at how he was captured. All right, so Gary Ridgeway terrorized the Seattle area in the 1980s and 1990s. He's believed to have murdered at least 71 teenage girls and women, many of who were prostitutes. Ridgeway would show a picture of his son. Now, this was a way of him building trust with the women he picked up. All right, so we know that he's building rapport, something similar that we know that LISK must have done as well. All right, so after strangling the victims, he would leave the girls' bodies in wooded areas around King County in Washington. Now, interesting, he would collect cigarettes, gum, and other debris from public areas. He would take that debris and litter the crime scene. He did this knowing it would contaminate the crime scene and cause issues for the investigating officers. Finally, Ridgeway also confessed to moving bodies across state lines into Oregon to ensure that the police would be thrown off his trail. Before Ridgeway was caught, Ted Bundy actually acted as a consultant on the investigation. Bundy would theorize that Ridgeway would return to the bodies and have his way with them again. This was later confirmed to be true by Ridgeway himself. Ridgeway would marry during his killing spree, and his wife would later speculate that he must have killed during the times that he was supposedly leaving early for overtime. Suffolk County police have said on record that LISK would spend a lot of time with the bodies, even after they're dead here. The FBI profile we have from the New York Times stated that LISK is also likely in a committed relationship and that they're wholly unaware of the significant other's criminal activities. Ridgeway, also like LISK, is very rare in that they both have victims of many different races. This is not typical. Oddly enough, Ridgeway was a suspect early on, but he passed the polygraph test. Despite passing the test, police collected saliva and hair samples. These samples didn't yield anything until DNA testing caught up in the early 2000s. Ridgeway was also arrested 2 times for prostitution-related crimes, and this fits the mold of serial killers often having minor arrests for less serious crimes before being caught for the murders. If LISK were to meet a similar fate, this would look similar to something like convicted murderer John Bittroff. Many have pointed out that he had a similar MO. He lived in Manderville, where there's been bodies found, and he had his own business that allowed him to be mobile and drive more than most of the population. This is not to say that Bill Truff is our main suspect. As we've said in another video, there's a unnamed person at this point that we go by the initials of SK, who also would fit this. He had his own car, he had a business, he had a trailer, and he was mobile. I encourage you to check out that video if you haven't already. So ultimately, how was Gary Ridgway caught? A forensic scientist identified microscopic spray paint spheres on a victim. The spray paint could only come from a very specific factory that Ridgway worked out of. Then they swabbed Ridgway, and this matched with DNA that was left in several victims. Today, technology is rapidly advancing, and it's this technology being applied to criminal justice that will ultimately have results. Just like in Ridgway's case, the technology had catched up before it could be applied to catch the monster. Today, we have geographic profiling as just one example. This profiling is used to examine locations of connected crimes to determine the most probable area of the offender's residence. While the idea of geoprofiling has been around since at least the 1990s, the concept has become more useful in an age where we have machine learning and AI that can assist in analyzing the data. Now, I have a PDF report on the profiling that I think I'll link in the description if you think it's interesting and want to read more. Keep in mind, I maintain a Google Drive that is open to all, that has many other resources I've used on my videos here. So take a look at it for sure. Now, while the technology could ultimately catch LISK, it could also be something never seen before. Unfortunately, though, this could also mean that we're years or decades away from justice for the families he left behind. The FBI estimates there are between 25 and 50 active serial killers in the United States at any given time, and most have not been caught. In the Practical Homicide Investigation book, there are many pages devoted to nailing home the idea that most serial killers are aware of police investigation techniques. Sound familiar when thinking of the reporting on LISK? It should. The detective also talks about how serial killers will change up their MO as they become more sophisticated in their crimes. So this drives home the point that when we take a look at LISK's killing and see that there are changes in the way he or they killed, it does not necessarily mean that we have different killers. It only highlights that they were evolving. It also means that the earlier killings, there's a greater chance that they may have picked on people that were easier to track back to them or made more mistakes. The killer will continue to perfect their ruse as they continue to offend. Much is said about their intelligence, but where they apply this ability is to recognize a potential victim, the ability to talk to a victim into the killer's safe zone. Let's look at Ted Bundy. Ted Bundy was considered good-looking, intelligent, and was able to wear a mask. He was highly involved with the estate-level politicians. He worked on Nelson Rockefeller's presidential campaign and was considered charismatic. Bundy would use this to his advantage with victims, often appearing with a cast on his arm to appear helpless to the victims. Of course, the prop was helpful, but without the ability to convince his victims to follow him to his preferred spot, the prop would have been worthless. We can see the same ability in LISK when he was texting all day with Amber Costello. Almost like foreplay, LISK spent the day spinning a web and convincing Amber to meet him on his terms, away from the home, in the evening, where there was less chance of him being seen. He convinced her to come alone, and when she would typically have a roommate come along on out calls, or have the John come to his house. The final thing was that he convinced her to walk down the street and to the left, where he would not be seen. So, going back to Ted Bundy, how was he caught? The first time, at least. Was it good old-fashioned police work? No, it was completely by accident. On August 16th, 1975, Ted Bundy was cruising around in a suburb of Salt Lake City in his tan Volkswagen Beetle before dawn. An officer, Robert Hayward, was doing paperwork in his car outside his home in the same area when a call went out for assistance on an unrelated matter. Officer Hayward took off to assist on the call when he noticed the tan VW bug sitting outside one of his neighbors' homes. The officer knew his neighbors were on vacation, but their teenage daughter had stayed home alone. Officer Hayward knew something was amiss, and the Volkswagen took off when he tried to approach. A chase would start, and the officer would catch up with the then unknown man at a gas station and approach with his gun drawn. Hayward would later recount that Bundy tried to say he was lost and then been at a drive-in movie playing Towering Inferno. Hayward knew that movie was not playing and the story didn't add up with the pre-dawn hours. Searching inside Bundy's car, he would find pantyhose, a ski mask, a crowbar, an ice pick, and handcuffs. This was just the beginning of Ted Bundy's ultimate depraved story. However, shows that someone as resourceful as Ted Bundy could be caught by their own doing, and some luck on the part of the officers. The amount of killers who were caught or almost caught by being pulled over is extensive. Just some of them: Israel Keyes, Joel Rifkin from Long Island, and even Dahmer, who did talk his way out of it, did get pulled over with a body in the car when he was young. Final notes. LISK gets away with it. As much as this idea is repulsive, and any of us that have even an ounce of empathy, we detest the very idea of this killer escaping justice. We must at least entertain the idea that it may happen. The annals of criminal justice is littered with cases that have never been solved, from the Victorian age Jack the Ripper to the late 60s Zodiac Killer. I make these videos in the hopes that in some very small way, it keeps the case alive. It's not much. I know my videos aren't as polished as, say, a Mr. Ballin or This Is Monsters, but the more we talk about it, the more we demand answers, the better our odds that the killer will eventually be brought into the light of day. If the public didn't cry out all these years, we wouldn't have known about the belt with the initials. We wouldn't have heard Shannan Gilbert's tragic call to 911. And there's a great chance that Valerie Mack would have been lost to time, only known as Jane Doe number 6. Don't forget these women. Continue to demand more of the agencies and politicians that have thus far failed these victims and their families. Thanks for watching.